Hey Everett, how you doing? Welcome to Bring Your Own Bold. How are things?
Everything's well. Thanks for having me, Dave. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Me too. It's a real pleasure. Listen, I'm really pumped to get into everything that we're going to be talking about with you today. The thing that really struck me when I started hearing about the direction that you're taking at the moment and how you help folks with what you call, well, this is the crux of it really, analog intelligence, the real or the other AI, as you so eloquently put it. Really excited to dive into
Mhm.
that today. But I thought a good place to start would be how that kind of focus or a focus on that, so to speak, helped you build brands at some amazing companies like Facebook and Stripe. Is it good to start there?
Mhm. Yeah, no, thanks for acknowledging that. I just was thinking about that a lot because one of the first things I did in my career here in Silicon Valley was I co-founded this. It's basically a print studio where we were making things physically. We were screen printing and we were sign painting, and it was my colleague back in the day, Ben Barry, and I during our time at Facebook, and we were both these print designers. And we just needed a place to kind of get our hands dirty. But we called it the Facebook Analog Research Lab, and something about it just stuck. Because we were, these lone print designers in a sea of engineers in the middle of Silicon Valley for the first time. And there's something about this concept of thinking with your hands. We were building technology, but we were building it for humans, and then connecting this digital to the analog world seemed to be like, I don't know, it just became, I guess, like this undertone for a lot of the work that I've done throughout my career. And mainly started because, again, I mentioned we were print designers. I was an exhibition designer, and I would design these physical spaces and experiences. And I think it was really about just connecting it to the humans that we were designing for at the end of the day, and making sure that we never lost sight of that. But also, the work that we were putting out needed to kind of be a reflection of the people that were building that, and I think you lose a lot of that personality and the humanity when you start relying too heavily on technology for these creative outputs, and it's not about the aesthetics. That's one quality for doing things with your hand. You get these mistakes and these moments that you wouldn't necessarily get if you were just using kind of digital technology for this stuff. But it really is just about showing the mark of the maker and acknowledging that we live in this world, and the work that we do is an extension of us, and we should kind of show that throughout. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the tech world, there are experiential events, which obviously have a very human touch to them. But other than that, everything seems to exist on a digital platform. I'm sure that was the case at Facebook, even in those days when you were there, when things were probably slightly more analog. Although we're talking, everything seems to be going that way these
yeah.
days. What was the reaction to the studio that you set up within Facebook, and what was some of the things that kind of came out of it that really helped people?
Mhm. I mean, at first it was probably confusion. I think, Silicon Valley at the time, and office culture was very, is very corporate, I guess you would say. Like, an architect would design a space, and that would be the space, and it would be very static in that way, and kind of a building evolves with you, and it grows, and like the people that inhabit it kind of, again, put their own stamp on this place. And we were doing that in real time. It was like this mini little urban environment. Like, the more people that came, the more things that we would put up, and the more people would see it evolving in real time. And the office space became a dialogue. It became a way for us to communicate with each other, us as designers to understand what was happening in the company and in Silicon Valley at the time, because again, this was like mid 2000s, and I think Facebook was like that first in that kind of newer wave of tech companies at the time. That, before that was like Yahoo and Google, and all those that, which still had that, this kind of very developer heavy, also like corporate and business internal cultures. And I think Facebook just had this younger, different almost punk rock vibe in Silicon Valley. And we were just kind of tapping into that and, responding to it. And we would put up things like we would sneak into the office and like wheat paste a poster, that was really just us thinking through some of these things. And then people would either respond positively, oftentimes they would respond negatively, and we would encourage them to respond in their own way. And they'd be like, okay, fine, I'll put up my own poster. And sometimes they would contradict. And that was the beauty of it. We like really allowed a lot of that dialogue and debate internally. And the physical space was like, I guess, just the epicenter of that.
That's amazing. That's really, really cool. And, I think today, obviously, there are fewer opportunities to do that because obviously people work remotely. And then you moved on to Stripe, and then you founded Stripe Press, or you one of the kind of original ideators behind Stripe Press. Is that right?
I mean, it mainly stemmed from the founders, John and Patrick. They're the brothers and the co-founders of the company, and they are these big bookworms. And as many people at that company, and myself included, someone came to them. The first book they published was about high growth companies, and the author Elad Gil said, I have all of this stuff, this wealth of information on my blog and written down, and I'd love to publish it, but it doesn't have a traditional home. So, John and Patrick were like, we should put it out there, but if we do this for you, we should figure out how to do it for other people. And that was really kind of the genesis of it. There was a handful of people thinking about it. We had like an editor at the time, there was another designer working on it. And, there's a few people really trying to stand it up. So I can't take credit for the whole concept. Yeah.
Sure. But I suppose the theme that runs through, or the thread that runs through all of this, I suppose, is the need to kind of balance, and this is really the theme of kind of this day of Bring Your Own Bold, if you like, the kind of the need to balance this necessity, I suppose, to live and breathe and work on digital platforms, on screens, almost be glued to screens at times in the way that we kind of interact and build and create, with the need to also step away from that and, have things in our hands, both in terms of consuming kind of stuff and things and media, but also creating as well. Is that something that you also then took into, because you were creative director at Anthropic, right? With,
Yes.
working on the Claude brand identity. We're fast forwarding in time quite a lot in that respect. But is that an ethos that you tried your best to take into Claude, which is 100% a digital product?
Yeah, but that was an interesting shift because not only was it just like technology in the digital sense, it's this other form of technology. It's artificial intelligence, it's neural networks, and it behaves very differently than the way that people think regular technology does. It's kind of its own thing there. But for me, I guess as a designer and as a creative, I think one of the principal rules is about appropriateness, and if I'm using my own style and aesthetic and trying to stamp that on everything, then it just becomes superficial. I think there needs to be a conceptual tie to why we're doing it. In Anthropic, it just makes so much sense because it's in the name. Anthropic is about humans and our time here on the planet. And then once I kind of realized that, I was like, oh, Anthropic is a company that is about humanity thriving. It happens to focus on artificial intelligence because that's like the most consequential thing of this time. But really their focus is on like what happens to humans in society with this technology. And once that kind of nugget revealed itself, then it made a lot of sense to actually use like analog and kind of physical ways to build out the brand identity and the voice. And even the fact that it's named Claude versus a string of numbers and letters or something that like most LLMs are named after. There's something that just like naturally started to evolve, and then I just like shined a light on that and made that the focus of the identity.
And when you were building out that identity, did you go back to that physical act of craft? Did you use any particular techniques in terms of stepping away from screens and using kind of more physical techniques to kind of help to bring all that to life?
Yeah, we did a lot of that. We used cut paper. Like physically the way that Matisse would. A lot of the photography that I would shoot would be 35 millimeter. I'm a big analog photographer. And I do that in my own personal work. Um, but I wanted it to be, to again show the physicality of it. So I would use things like film grain, as like these subtle ways to show that this is like a tangible thing. We had illustrators, like human illustrators. We weren't like prompting like image, like generative images to like create a lot of the visual stuff that we were doing. So there were these like things that you couldn't see behind the scenes, but then like in the output, it all felt like it was coming from humans, like because it was, and we weren't, even though we were an AI company, it felt counterintuitive to a lot of people. Like, why don't you just use the generative AI thing to do these image outputs and stuff? And I'm like, well, I really want us to, at least in this foundational period, to really explore like the people that are here and like what they can do to bring this to life. So
Yeah, absolutely. I do think, I mean, it's quite a timely thing because we've just seen new campaigns from Claude and ChatGPT that kind of go down that route, that focus more. And like you say, shot on 35 millimeter film, it's well versed now that the agency Isle of Any produced a campaign for
mhm.
ChatGPT that is very cinematic and very raw and very human, doesn't really use
Yeah.
Gen AI technology. And I think this goes back to your original point, right? That you ultimately have to focus on the brand and the humanity behind the brand. But
Yes.
when you saw that campaign for ChatGPT, did that take you back to some of the stuff you were doing for Claude?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, again, I think once companies start competing very fiercely in a space, you start to see them kind of co-opting ideas or trying to dance around like what each other's doing and trying to put their own spin on it. So I think it's par for the course. At a certain point, a lot of like branding and marketing starts. It's hard to distinguish like where it's coming from in a particular category. Like a lot of car manufacturers, if you remove the logos, you'd be like, oh, I don't know who this is coming from. So I think that's maybe the kind of curse of a lot of the marketing mindset when they come like, oh, we need to pivot away from the technology and focus on the humanity. But like, what does that mean? A lot of people are kind of going back to the same techniques for that. But it really does come down to, again, like I guess the why, as you would call it, like the why of the company. And I still think that Anthropic is focused on humans and society, but with any brand, you know, it is like the people that are making that have their own kind of distinct mark. And like, even though like agencies are doing this stuff, it still has to come from the epicenter of the company. And that kind of shines through. And then you can start to see how the campaigns are actually like quite differentiated. So
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. And speaking of the people behind the brand, there are a lot of folks who are going to be tuning into this who are the creative leads at technology businesses. It's a big part of our audience at Bring Your Own Bold. And I know that a lot of them are wrestling with either the need or the want or the desire to kind of bring in transformative, tools, digital tools like Gen AI, whether that's image creation or whether that's things like ChatGPT, whatever it may be, other tools obviously as well. But I know that a lot of your work now that you've stepped away from Anthropic and have started work by Everett, which would be great to kind of get into in a bit more detail in a
yeah.
second. But they're really trying to balance it with the importance of going back to that core element of human craft. What advice would you have for anyone who's kind of struggling to kind of find that balance and feeling like they're not as immersed as they could be and going back to that original craft?
Yeah. Oh, what advice? This is like, how do I put this? I think every job that I've been at, I was probably at some point like very close to being fired in a good way, where I was like, I think I'm striking the right chord because, again, at Facebook, when we were focusing a lot on making posters, it wasn't that we were making posters. It's like the messaging behind that. And like what we were trying to do was something that like people couldn't quantify. They're like, what does this have to do with us selling ads and selling a product on this platform. But then, over a decade later, they're like, wow, that really was the epicenter of the culture and the vibe of this company that now employs, I don't know how many people are there, probably 100,000 of people that work there now still feel what that culture was like. Um, Even with Stripe, when we were building the press thing, people were like, why are we doing this thing? Why are we making books versus doing like content marketing, in the traditional sense, So I think there's always these people that are going to question some of the decisions that you do, and I think if you really believe in the thing, you just have to be willing to really push for it. And this is just like my way of approaching it. I can only be the way that I am, and that's like a physical maker, and I use the tools that I have, and um, I don't know. I think you just have to like really own that and not be afraid to like put it out there when you're working at these companies. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And can you tell us a little bit about Work
mm.
by Everett? What are you aspiring to do, and how are you aspiring to help people?
Yeah, a big part of it is I've been working at these early stage brands, kind of helping them in their infancy, but also like teasing out their humanity and like what's your unique story, not what's your marketing differentiation or what are all these like kind of business aspects, but like who are the people and like who are you building for and like what's that story behind it. And I've always done that in-house at a company where I've been able to spend a good amount of time absorbing things and soaking it in. But I've always wanted to be able to do that for other folks. So like, any person or business or company or whatever that really wants to do something kind of more in that vein, that's kind of my jam. I'm looking for companies that are thinking differently in that sense. If they want someone that's just gonna be a creative production house that's going to help them make the number go up, then I'm probably not the right person. But if it's someone that like wants to do something that's uniquely themselves, but they don't know how to articulate it, they don't know what the opportunity or the different ways to bring that to life is, then I think that's really what I want to do. And it is like centered around storytelling, so a lot of my work, even though I'm a designer, a lot of it kind of ends up with some film and narrative element to it, so um, it's part editorial, but it's also, again, really tapping into the humanness of why a company exists. So.
And are there particular kind of companies that you see out there that are maybe struggling with that? I mean, I'm immediately thinking more to the tech space, especially certain categories
Mhm.
within tech that maybe get drawn towards kind of the product and not necessarily the feeling and the emotion and the story behind the product and how it makes people's lives better and easier and more convenient and all the rest of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there's so many companies that I think have a unique story, but they don't own it. They don't really like shine a light on it or bring it to life. When they're focusing so much on the what, like this is our product and these are all the boxes that it checks or the things that it does. I think that's fine depending on what you're building, and if you're not building this platform that supports like this uh larger group of people, then I think it's okay to be very specific about the thing that you're building. I don't think like every little thing needs to have this really deep story. If you're trying to sell a very useful product that helps someone, like so there's that side of it. But I think there are companies that genuinely like aspire to do something bigger than the thing that they're doing, and a lot of them get so fixated on the what, like on communicating the very tactical value proposition of the things, which I think you need to do, but they don't know how to do the kind of storytelling element of it, especially in startups that often have this like very unique founding and origin story. A lot of people just kind of gloss over that because they're so in it on a daily basis. They're like, oh, that was like a few weeks ago. That's so old. But most people out there haven't really heard that. And it's something that you really can live in for a long period of time because that's never going to change. Your product will always evolve and it'll get better and you'll pivot. But the thing that brought you together, that got you to start this thing, is something that you just really need to bring to life, and most people don't. So,
So I
yeah.
completely agree with what
Mm,
you're saying about the founding teams, especially because
mm,
from my experience, when when founders of particularly really innovative startups come together and start a business, it's because they want to create a really differentiated product, something that's different to everything else on the market because they
mm.
spot that gap. But when it comes to telling a story around the product, they don't want that story to be too different because ultimately they get a little bit scared that that it's going to be too maverick. People aren't going to understand the story. They want something that's familiar to them, to buyers. So I just wondered if you've ever really seen that disconnect between founders suddenly being hesitant to take risks around the story that they tell.
Yeah, I think there's so much pressure on these founders, especially when you get a round of investment or you get any real momentum to a thing. It's like, oh, I can't mess this up. It's like going well. I don't want to deviate from what's working now, but also what's these tried and true best practices that they're being told by everyone kind of externally. So I don't know. I think that is kind of the curse when a founder has a lot of voices in their ear, when they're looking at what other people are doing. It's hard not to like hold the line and stay true to who you are. So I definitely see that on a pretty regular basis. But I don't know. I still think there are some founders that you just need to have a good team around you that can help kind of tease a lot of these things out of you, and that's like one of the things that I've been fortunate to be able to do in different positions, is like, you guys are thinking about this thing over here, and that's your job, that's what you're really great at, that's why we're all here, but there's this other thing over here that I think has some legs, and it just takes people to help bring that to life, and that's why I think the creative's role inside these companies is so there's so much opportunity there, because we have a different mindset, and that's why we became creatives in this industry. It's what we bring to the table, but when we're too driven by like the business metrics, then we start to take on those qualities and adopt that skill set, but that's not what makes us who we are as practitioners. So I think you need that kind of business mindset. You need those founders that have the vision for like what they're trying to build, but you also need like this other side of the brain that's like helping, I guess, like package it and articulate it in a way that's authentic to them. So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
mm,
And I mean, being a creative at an early stage startup like that is not without its risk, but it is something that
yeah,
you've been drawn to in your career.
mm,
This idea of maybe being a little bit of there being a bit of creative tension, as you say, between what
mm-hmm.
founders maybe want to do or could do, but don't necessarily feel that they can. But obviously, having a creative leader in there can really help. So, what advice? Do you have any particular advice for kind of? I'm sure there are creative leaders out there who are watching this who, like you, find themselves drawn to these types of startups but really want to make an impact. How have you made an
Yeah.
impact in those roles?
Yeah, it really is. I think just whatever piques your interest, like you should follow that intuition. That's like my biggest advice, is because I think a lot of folks overthink things. Maybe they're focused now they're focused on like, oh, is this a company that is going to take off? Is their stock going to be worth anything, or are they going to actually win and succeed, or are they just going to fail? And I think people get fixated on a lot of those things before they even say like, actually really like what they're doing, I like these people, I want to help them, I want to work on that problem for a couple of years and then see where it goes. For me, I think that's the beauty of early stage startups in particular, is like you really can make it what you want it to be. When I joined Facebook, it had like recently come out of being a college website. Social media was not really a thing back then, and a lot of design mentors that I had, people that I looked up to, were like, "Why would you go there? It sounds really boring." Even other kind of creatives peers that I had were like, "Oh, that sounds kind of corny," because everyone wanted to work in agencies at the time. And then by the time I was leaving, they're like, "Oh, why would you leave that place? It's awesome. You've done all this cool stuff." And I think people don't realize that a lot of that came from like the agency of being able to bring this thing to life in a time and a company that allowed you the space to do that. So I don't know, that's what I look for. Is it's not like, is this the next big thing? Is this the wave of something that I want to ride? You know, when I joined Anthropic, it was also, I was the first designer there, and everyone was saying like, "Oh, AI is just a fad. AI is the next crypto." Even though it had been this discipline that's been around for quite some time, you know, it just like really started to take off. And then again, you know, a couple of years later, when I left, people are like, "Oh man, I want to work there. I want to join this like next wave of things." And for me, it's like, you know, you just have to like go with your intuition in the beginning, you know, and it, you know, if it fails, you know, you can get back on the horse or do something. But if you're not willing to take that risk and that leap of faith, then you're going to miss those types of opportunities.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And again, I hope there are people out there who are inspired by that, especially if you're looking for a new role, because I think, you know, the job market out there is pretty tough at the moment, especially for creatives. But sometimes you do just genuinely have to take a leap of faith, and the startup world can be wild, as you well know,
Yeah.
but also super rewarding. I just wanted to kind of finish where we started, if it's okay, because I know that following this, a lot of folks are going to go and check out your site, workbyeverett.com, I believe. And they're going to see analog intelligence plastered right on that homepage. I just wondered if you could finish by just getting a bit of an insight into what that is to you, what that means to you, and why it's so important to you.
Yeah, I mean, one aspect of it is thinking with your hands. It's like for creatives, really reconnecting with the tools that we have every day, you know, and it's being able to kind of connect that output and that physical making with your brain, because I think that that is a muscle that needs to continually be worked. And it's not anti-technology. I think there's actually like a happy marriage between the two, but I think especially young designers today, they're born into these tools right away. So the first question is like, what tool should I learn, or what things should I, you know, figure out how to do in terms of output? But the fundamental thing is really just you being able to make things, you know, on your own, whether you're writing it through words, you know, and outsourcing that to LLMs or something. You know, I think people's mindsets are shifting. So for me, it's just about getting into that meditative practice of continuing to produce work on your own. You know, there is this big like cognitive offload that's happening with AI right now. You know, it's in all of our apps. You know, all of our emails are like, write this with AI. You know, every kind of thing has like a prompt field inside of it where you just kind of tell it to do something in very broken English, you know, and then it starts to do stuff and you keep correcting it and all that. And you start to become the clients or the stakeholders that frustrate creatives. Like we take on a lot of those qualities, you know, and we're like speaking at LLMs in that way. So I don't know. I think it is really just about being in the process of things. You know, I think that creativity and design is a verb, and you need to like continually be practicing and feeding that stuff, because it's not just an output. You know, it's not like here's the creative as a tangible thing. It's like creativity is a process, you know, and you just need to like treat it as an input as well. So it like kind of helps feed you as a designer and as a maker of things.
Yeah, completely agree. And again, I really, really hope that folks watching this take all that on board. And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, we will share your website as in the notes for this session. So please do go and check that out. Please do connect with Everett on LinkedIn as well. But thank you so much, Everett. Really, really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you joining Bring Your Own Bold this year. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks for having me. Great to see y'all.